The night had fallen heavy over the valley, the kind of winter night that swallowed every sound and turned the air into glass. Snow whispered against the old wooden fences, and the wind pushed through the open cracks of Samuel Hart's barn like a ghost, searching for warmth. He had been up since dawn, repairing a broken wagon axle and feeding the horses, the kind of chores that never ended for a man who lived alone. At 42, Samuel had learned that silence could be both a friend and a curse. His land stretched wide and lonely on the edge of the town of Clayridge, and his barn, though old and weathered, had become his sanctuary, a place where the noise of the world couldn't reach him. But that night something was different. He felt it in his bones before he saw it. The dogs had barked once, low and uncertain, and then fallen silent again. The horses stirred restlessly in their stalls. When Samuel lifted his lantern and stepped into the biting cold, he could see his breath rising like smoke in the orange glow. "Easy, Duke," he muttered to his dog, who stood stiff by the barn door, tail low, eyes fixed on something in the shadows. That's when he heard it, faint, broken breathing. He paused, his hand tightening around the lantern handle. The sound was small, fragile, like the whimper of a dying thing. He pushed open the barn door, and the cold wind bit into his face. The lantern light swung wildly across the hay, over the tools, over the stalls, and then it stopped. There, half buried under a torn blanket and a pile of straw, was a woman. Her skin was pale as moonlight, her lips blue, her dress soaked and torn. For a heartbeat, Samuel just stood there, thinking she might already be gone. Then he saw her chest move, shallow, trembling, fighting for one more breath. "Lord, help me," he whispered, dropping to his knees beside her. He set the lantern down and touched her cheek. It was ice. He pulled off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, feeling the rough fabric brush against her fragile bones. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, glassy and lost. "Please." She tried to speak, but her voice was nothing more than a cracked whisper. "You're safe," Samuel said firmly, his voice rough but steady. "You're going to be all right." He lifted her carefully, as if she were made of paper, and carried her into the house. Inside, the fire was low, barely glowing. Samuel kicked it alive, throwing on more logs until the flames roared back to life. He laid her down on the old couch by the hearth, covering her with every blanket he could find. Slowly, the color began to return to her cheeks, though her body still shivered violently. He poured a cup of hot tea and held it to her lips. "Drink," he said quietly. "It'll help." She took a few trembling sips, and tears slid down her face, tears not from pain but from exhaustion, fear, and maybe something else she couldn't yet name. When she finally found her voice, it came out soft and broken. I didn't know where else to go." Samuel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You're safe now," he repeated. "What happened to you?" She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the fire as if she feared it might judge her. "I was supposed to be married today," she said finally. "But when I reached the church, he never showed up." She swallowed hard, the words catching in her throat. "They said he'd run off, that I was left at the altar. Everyone looked at me like I was something pitiful, something to laugh at." Samuel said nothing for a long time. He had known pain, losing his wife years ago, watching life slip from her eyes while the doctor stood helpless. But this woman's hurt was a different kind. It was fresh, sharp, and cruelly public. "So you came here?" he asked gently. "No," she said, shaking her head. "I started walking. I didn't know where I was going. The storm came and I couldn't see. I must have wandered into your land." She looked up at him, eyes full of apology. "I didn't mean to trespass." Samuel gave a small, tired smile. "Ain't no trespass. When it's life or death," he looked toward the window where snow pressed against the glass. "You'll stay here tonight. Storm's not letting up any time soon." She nodded weakly. Her fingers clutched the blanket as if afraid he'd send her away. Samuel noticed how small her hands were, how young she looked, maybe late 20s. Life hadn't had the chance to be kind to her yet. "What's your name?" he asked. "Clara," she whispered. "Clara Reed." He nodded. "All right, Miss Reed. Rest now. We'll talk when the sun's up." She tried to smile, but exhaustion pulled her back under. Within minutes she was asleep, her breathing deep and steady. Samuel sat nearby, watching the firelight dance across her face. He didn't know why, but something about her presence filled the cabin with a strange warmth. Not just from the fire, but from the feeling that fate had sent her there for a reason. He thought about the old saying his mother used to tell him, "Sometimes God sends the broken to the broken so they can fix each other." Outside, the storm raged on. The wind howled like a wounded beast, and the snow piled higher against the door. But inside that small house, something had changed. Samuel didn't feel so alone anymore.